Yeah. Well, that's cool.
Shelby, pull the blanket up. Thanks.
I guess it would be good for me to, like, scan over some of this stuff, because if we're going to be talking about 23andMe, I remember when I saw you last time, I was like, let me tell you everything about genetics.
Yeah, you were so excited.
Like a maximum amount of it can film for however long.
I'll let you know when it's getting close. We're at 1:23.
Oh, okay. We're fine then.
It's rolling.
I feel like you're the godfather. Sitting in the important chair. Okay, question. We're gonna have a great blooper reel, by the way. Should we face each other?
Jose, if you guys want to...
Or, like, I feel like that's more natural.
Don't face each other directly.
Hi. Hi. But, like that, you know?
Yeah.
I feel like that's natural.
I'm just gonna be like slush into it. Okay. Just mirror each other's body.
Yeah. Oops. That's okay. What?
It's fine.
Yeah, it's just like a little wood
Black.
thingy.
Okay.
Yeah, you guys keep pulling it.
I know. It's hard. It's the
because I keep
blanket.
adjusting myself. Like,
Yeah.
how is the most natural way for me to sit now that I'm being watched? I can't imagine how I would be sitting otherwise. What do I do with my body?
Okay, I'm just gonna start us.
Okay.
So both of our parents took the 23andMe ancestry, DNA, genetic test.
Right.
And your mom took it.
Yeah, my mom and my grandmother took the test.
Okay. And were there any profound realizations?
Yeah. So yes and no. My family, like every other American family, it would seem, that has been here for any length of time, believes, like, it's part of our family lore, I guess, that, we are descended from Native Americans, and my nana, my grandmother, my nana, who took the test, I grew up with her telling me all these stories about how, I'm related to Pocahontas, and...
No, but really Pocahontas?
Yeah,
Okay.
Like, literally, I remember being in, I was a part of the Boys and Girls Club, and I was, like, 6 years old, and, like, one of the only white kids there, and I, like, wanted to, like, fit in, and so, when one of the, like, the little girls was, like, she was, like, a black little girl was, like, making fun of me for being white, and I was like, well, but I'm related to Pocahontas, don't you know? But it was, like, very much a part of, like, my family lore, and my nana, I swear, like, every time, like, over the years, all the time, she would, like, when I was a child, whatever, like, distantly related to Pocahontas, but then, like, as we got older, suddenly her dad was an undercover, a Native American,
What does that mean?
Well, that he was passing for white, but
okay,
that he was
white passing.
actually...
Got you.
Yeah.
I thought you meant, like, he was not Native American, and, like...
No.
Okay.
Yeah, so by the time she took this test, she was, like, almost half Native American.
Yeah.
But then when she gets these actual results, it's, like, 0.1% or less Native American ancestry, which the 23andMe, like, it's really kind of a complicated science because it doesn't necessarily test, it's not like it detects all of your ancestors that you've ever had, it detects the genetic code that you have. So, I mean, it's not just, like, straight up and down that she definitely had no Native American ancestry, but she certainly was not almost half Native American, and her dad was definitely not a white-passing Native man. And I haven't gotten a chance to talk to her about it, but it's so central to, like, her identity and, like, this family story. And so, yeah, I mean, it was kind of not revelatory because everyone in my family, my mother included, it was like the inside joke, like, oh yeah, Nana, she's, you know, part Cherokee, didn't you know?
Yeah.
But yeah, that was my experience with the ancestry.
So I have 2 questions for you. One, you said the science complicated, and I want you to talk more about that because you researched that and looked into it, about how it's not necessarily, like you said, it's not going to trace / tell you all of your lineage.
Mm-hmm.
All it does for an individual is tell you your specific genetics, DNA, which is different from your lineage, yeah?
Yeah, which it was the most fascinating thing for me about researching this 23andMe and other genetic ancestry tests, because I found like a bunch of people in the like comment message board saying, oh, me and my sibling, we share the same parents and our ancestry results are different. Yeah. What's the deal?
That's crazy. And
so when I like started looking into it and trying to figure out why that was, their explanation, 23andMe's explanation, was that because your because you get 50% of your DNA from each of your parents, but you each get a different 50%. And that happens every generation, right? So when you're, like, I got a different 50% than my brother did, and right. So maybe I got the genetic information, the part of the DNA that is marked, which is another complicated thing, but basically the way that they the way that they determine where you're from is they look at your genetic code, and then your DNA is made up of all these alleles. And certain alleles are found more frequently in certain parts of the world. So, right. Or sometimes only, like, exclusively in certain parts of the world. So maybe this genetic marker, this allele, is most commonly found in, like, South Africa, or maybe it's most commonly found in Korea or Japan or something. And so if you have that marker that suggests that you are most likely from, or you have ancestors that are most likely from that place. Yeah. But if it's also quite possible that you had an ancestor who was from that place, and had that allele, but that allele didn't get passed to you because you only got 50% of their genetic code. So it's possible that, like, my brother could take a test and would show that he had more Native American ancestry than I did. Yeah. Even though we both have the same parents, just because he got that genetic code and I didn't.
Even in that regard, though, it could show that you supposedly had, more of some sort of allele of a specific ethnicity or race. But it's not a perfect science, right? It's just like, based on the large data pool we have from all these different people, it looks most similar to, it looks most similar to these other people.
Right, so just because you have this genetic marker that is most often a part of, or most commonly found in this part of the world, doesn't mean, like, the genetic ancestry test will tell you you are from this part of the world. Like, let's say this genetic marker is found in both Korea and Japan. Mm-hmm. But it's most commonly found in Japan and less frequently found in Korea. Right. And so 23andMe will tell you, so they do have an application where it allows you to say, like, with what amount of certainty you want them to provide you your results. So say, like, the base setting for 23andMe is like 50% certainty, which is pretty low. Uh-huh. So with 50% certainty, they can say that you are probably Japanese. So if your setting is on that, then it'll tell you Japanese. But if you bump up the, like, you want it to be more accurate, say up to 90% accurate, then instead of telling you that you're Japanese, it'll tell you that you're have Asian ancestry.
Right.
Because it could be Korean, it could be Japanese.
And when we played with that on my father's 23andMe, we bumped it from 50% accuracy or certainty to 90% accuracy or certainty. It went from less specific races and identity, like ethnicities, like French or German or British or Irish, to Northwestern European. So it becomes much less specific.
Right, and so, I mean, and some markers are found, it's possible that a marker, so they get their test subjects from, or their genetic pool of information, their reference data, I think is what they refer to it as.
Which is just from people who have essentially bought into their product, yeah?
Yeah, exactly. So it's mostly from 23andMe customers. And so it's possible that, like, there is one segment of the results that says something along the lines of, you know, that they can't classify where that's from, or it's unidentifiable, or something along those lines. And that's because, like, sometimes if you bump up that certainty, it's like, well, it's most commonly found in Central America, but in fact, it's found all over the world. So they can't really be certain. There's no such thing as, like, a genetic marker of blackness or something, right? So it's a really messy, complicated thing. And they have, for all of the Americas, North and South America, they only have one set of reference data. So they can't tell you that you're from North America or that you have ancestors from South America. It's just you have Native American blood. Which, what does that...
Right, that could mean a multitude of
yeah, like,
things.
I mean, how different would, like, an Inuit person be from somebody who is living in, like, the southern tip of Southern America?
Right.
Like, how... Do they share the same genetic markers any more than a North American Indian shares the same genetic markers as a European? I don't really know, and I don't know that they can really answer that question either. I don't know.
Another question I had for you. You said that your grandmother being Native American was significant to her identity, or at least to her, like you said, like, family lore. Yeah. What does that mean? Like, are there specific things that she had in her home, or things she would say that she's like, oh, our Native American ancestors had this, or our Native American ancestors would... do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, totally. And I think that that's a funny thing, because...
Or was it just legend, right? Was it just this mythos that...
I think it's mostly... It's like, instead of... Though it was an important part of her identity, or probably still is, because that's the nature of, like, belief. If she believed that she was Native American, no test is going to tell her any different.
Sure.
But it was never, is never a part of our cultural heritage. Our cultural heritage is, like, white working class people who have mostly grown up in the West, and her, and I think that belief that you have Indian blood or something, is, like, almost a part of white culture, or, like, the white
Specifically
American,
in America,
yeah, like the white American myth, more than it represents any actual Native American culture, because certainly...
Why do you think that is? Why do you think, like, specifically white people in America who have probably had family here for generations are like, oh, we had Native American ancestors? Is that, like, somehow to... I don't know.
I don't know.
Yeah.
My, like, two thoughts were, like, either or both. Part of it maybe is, like, white people seem to think, or white Americans seem to think that, like, there is no such thing as white culture, and that we don't have culture, and, like, they want to feel like they have some sort of culture. And so, like, to feel like you're ethnic is to feel like you have culture, because we've associated those two things with, like, being non-white. Like, white is just, like, the baseline. It's just the basic. It's just normal. And so...
So it makes you, like, feel more unique about your identity?
Yeah.
Or, like, no, like, it's
Yeah.
not just the baseline, not just the normal?
Yeah, you want to feel like you're special. You want to feel like, I don't know, maybe that's not right. Or maybe it's because, I mean, we've fetishized Native Americans, and, like, we think that there's something, especially amongst a certain liberal mindset, you romanticize nature and your relationship to it, and you want to feel like you're connected to it in some genetic way. I don't know. What do you think?
I don't want to say it's for any specific bad or wrong reason, because I don't know if that's necessarily the case, but I also don't know if it's for the right reasons. You know what I mean?
What would be the right reason?
Right? Because that was, like, something you honestly... Like, I think in relation to your grandma, right? If it was something she honestly believed, and she not only believed it because she had familial traditions that were a part of that culture, then that might be heartbreaking. That might be really, like you said, significant to her identity if she had, again, these, like, upbringings or this culture that she associated specifically to Native American traditions, ideals, values. But because that's not the case, again, I question if it's for, like you said, other reasons than to just not be the normal, to just not... In certain cases, I wonder, I question if it's to feel better about our historical past, like our history, right?
To lay some veil over your white guilt or something.
Yeah.
It's tempting. I could see that, which makes me think of, like, that woman, we've talked about her before, Rachel Dolezal.
Yeah. Who was just recently back in the news.
Yeah, with her new Nigerian name. Who's a white woman who was head of the Seattle NAACP and was outed as Caucasian, and, like, she just said she identified with blackness, and it was like,
which complicates all of those terms, right? Once you put it in a case study like that of, well, here's Rachel Dolezal, who doesn't have any, like, negative, or isn't trying to hurt anybody, but is very much just taken this culture that she wasn't raised in, that she has no genetic identity in, but again, just kind of took it, and I don't even know if that's the right term to use, because that's what she...
It's like almost like she didn't... It's like she took her idea of what she thought... It's like she was raised white.
Yes.
And then, as a child, saw representations of blackness that she identified with. But she didn't see blackness through a black perspective. She saw blackness through a white perspective and identified what... She identified with what white people see as what blackness is.
Yeah.
If that makes sense. Like a really roundabout way of... Just because she doesn't really appropriate... Or I guess she kind of appropriates black culture, but it's not really blackness that she's taking on. It's a white idea of blackness.
Right.
But how is that... Is that different than, like, everybody's grandma who thinks that they're a Native American? Is it like a... Like shades, all shades of the same thing? Are those two things, like, different beasts?
There's a part of me that wants to say that's fairly similar, right?
Yeah.
I think it's mildly different in that, like, Rachel obviously did a decent job to actually looking into the culture, you know what I'm saying, and actually practicing it, whatever that looks like in some way. Because if you become the head of a chapter of an NAACP, you've obviously somehow become familiarized with that culture enough to become linguistically, right, like, knowledgeable within that culture, and
So
to
at least,
become, you know, it's kind of like, I don't know.
So, like, in some ways, you're saying what she did or is doing is somehow...
It's almost
like,
educational. It's almost educational, right? Because at least she took the time to, like, learn about that culture. Does that make sense?
Yeah, she, like, taught African American studies at a university.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow, I didn't know that.
Yeah, it's like, but then that makes it, like, it's like she tried, which is like, I'm on some level, I'm like sort of sympathetic to her, because I'm like, oh, you recognize that race is a social construct, and so if blackness isn't real, it's not genetic, then what is it? It's an identity, and like,
Yeah.
so she wants to like destigmatize black identity, but then it's messy because, I mean, for a few reasons. Because as a white person, she can pass as black, and she did. But a dark-skinned black person couldn't in no way pass for white and challenge those social constructs in the same way.
Yeah.
But, and it's like nice that she wanted to educate herself and help educate other people. But also seems just like, so, it's like painfully misguided, like, because she really thinks she's doing something good and something important, and I sympathize with that, but she's also taking on this air of authority about something that she obviously, like, misunderstands in a crucial way.
Sure.
But...
Yeah, and again, she's that perfect case study, right, for, okay, we know race, right, is a socially constructed thing that's become very real, right? Even though it's a socially constructed thing that has really no DNA genetic significance, coming back to our 23andMe results, right?
Yeah.
All of these things are really insignificant. It's the cultures that's surrounded this racial identity that are significant, right? Like, that is what adds significance to that. So I think when you appropriate that culture and just claim it, that is problematic.
Yeah.
And complicated.
I wanted to talk to you about, so we haven't gotten to talk too much about your family's history and your relationship to this 23andMe test, and your relationship to your ancestry and what the test means to you.
Yeah. So like I said, my father took the 23andMe test as well. No real surprises. Basically said he was a European in the most recent history of his lineage. I think, as most 23andMe tests do, it said at some point in his past a family member / person came from Africa, because that's where people came from. Yeah, so nothing especially significant. I didn't have any emotional responses, or really honestly a lot of interest in the test, because it told us things we already assumed.
Yeah.
And I don't identify with my dad and his ancestry very much, just because of family dynamics.
Yeah, talk about that.
So growing up, and my dad, my father is white, identifies as European, identifies primarily as Irish and British, which it turned out that's where his last European ancestor probably came from, according to this 23andMe test. But my mother identifies as Hispanic, and her maternal, we don't know as much about her paternal grandparents and stuff, but her maternal grandfather was from Mexico, and actually ran away from Pancho Villa during like the Mexican Civil War, and apparently her grandmother was Basque, so a small country between France and Spain.
Wait, you said her grandmother?
Yeah, was Basque.
And where did they meet? So she was Basque, like she came from Basque country, or she was, like, what does that mean to be Basque?
That I don't know. I don't know if she just identified that way and hadn't, like, necessarily assimilated or identified with Mexican culture yet.
But they met in Mexico.
They met in Mexico. Yeah. But by and large, my family, again, that's her maternal side. Her paternal side, we just think all came from Mexico.
Huh.
But she's just always identified and, considered herself to be Mexican specifically. Even though with her own lineage, what tracing she has done, technically I think we're Guatemalan. But it's interesting because, her identity and the way she identifies herself is Mexican. And that's the way my whole family identifies.
Which is such an interesting thing because for as long as I've been aware of race, from an early age I always thought of, like, Mexican was a race.
Yeah.
And it's often used in that way, but what does it even really mean to be, because you could be Mexican and not be native. Right, so that's a really complicated, so do you identify, or does your mother identify as Hispanic, Latino, Mexican? How are those things different to you or to her?
And that was something, and probably even now, I think I'm still mulling through those different terms.
Mm-hmm.
I've never used, and I don't know why, but I've never used the term, maybe because it's not Latin America, I've never used the term Latina.
Mm-hmm.
And my mother has never used that term, and I never heard my grandmother use that term to identify herself. Occasionally Hispanic, if somebody would be like, are you Hispanic, right? Or a survey, right? Do you identify as Latino and Hispanic? Well, yes, she does, right?
Yeah.
But again, primarily she would say like, oh, I'm Mexican, I have Mexican heritage.
Yeah.
And even, so she grew up in my small town in Wyoming, Worland, Wyoming, where lots of Hispanic, Mexican people settled because of the beet farms. So there was lots of work in that area, in the Bighorn Basin in Wyoming, for beet farming, and it was also in Yakima, Washington. So we have family in Yakima, Washington, and in Worland, Wyoming specifically, because that's where beet farming was.
When did they go there?
So my grandparents worked the beet farms in my hometown.
Oh, cool.
And they both grew up there. But I think they specifically went to Worland, my grandfather's family, probably when he was a young child, and my grandmother's also when she was a young child, to work there.
That's something you don't hear much about. Like, when I think Wyoming, I tend to think whiteness and cowboys, when in fact it seems that there's a big history of migrant workers, or
even to this day, really.
Yeah. There is a large Hispanic population. There has been for a long time, and it's something that I haven't really heard much about or know much about.
Yeah.
And I wonder how, like, the cultural impact that they've had on the state, on the culture, and how the relationship for a Mexican farm worker is different historically than it has been for other cultural, like, other ethnic groups. Because, I mean, I know that there were, I think, Chinese and Vietnamese workers in Wyoming. There have been, obviously, Native Americans and white people, to some extent, black settlers. There's been, I mean, everybody has been in Wyoming, and yet the dominant narrative is of
the white
The
cowboy.
white cowboy.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
I think because that is the majority of the population, no doubt. But yeah, no, we definitely, I think the state has a history and just of having a Hispanic presence, right? A dominant Hispanic culture in certain places, like my hometown. But yeah, going back to, I think, your original question, maybe, I don't, and especially when I was young, I didn't identify with the white part of my family history. But it's also very odd, right? Because I'm no doubt appear to just be white.
Yeah.
And so I think my identity is no doubt constructed by that as well, whether I wanted it to be or not. Even though family traditions, familial identity.
What is that? So what are the cultural traditions that you refer to? What is the identity, the cultural identity you have from your mother and your mother's side of the family?
I would narrow it to 3 things. And again, I've spent a lot of time thinking about this, right? Because it's kind of like this dissociative identity of like, I look very white. People treat me like I'm very white, but I feel Hispanic. What does that mean? What does that mean to feel Hispanic? Like, Mexican even. And I couldn't speak of Mexican heritage from Mexico. I don't know what that is. So the way I've come to conceptualize my, Mexican heritage, my familial heritage, is in 3 things. The first one's silly, but I really do think that this can be traced to my grandmother and possibly even her mother, her family. My mother's always been extraordinarily clean. Like, ridiculously, not just a neat house, but floors are scrubbed, things are dusted, walls are wiped clean. And I didn't know it was odd, right? Like, I didn't know that was different growing up until I'd go to my friends' houses, and that wasn't the case. And I'd also connect that to her appearance. She keeps herself very clean. She's always, and very put together. And I didn't know that was odd either until actually my best friend in high school said, and she was always very honest, said, I know that your mom really looks after herself, and I think it's because she's Mexican. And I was like, what? She's like, yeah, she always has her hair done and her makeup done and in nice clothes. And I'm like, yeah, isn't that just what moms do? Like, I thought that's what moms do. And I didn't, I wasn't especially critical of much of anything at that point. But then she said, yeah, like, my mom will just throw on some sweats and no makeup and walk outside and go to the grocery store. But my mom would never do that. Like, she wouldn't go to the grocery store without her hair done and her makeup on.
Okay, so then once she said that, your friend said that, did you notice that was true of other Hispanic women around you?
Yes, and especially, so my mom's one of 7 kids.
Oh, wow.
So she has 3 other sisters, and they're the exact same way, and in fact 2 of them are cosmetologists.
Huh.
So it's always something they valued.
Yeah, what's that about? What do you think the relationship is between, like, a Mexican cultural heritage or identity and that presentation? Or is it like a specifically Wyoming thing? Is it just your family? What is the connection that you see there?
So the way I connect it to broader Mexican identity at large is, I think, working in the beet fields. I think working as a laborer, working as not only a laborer, but somebody who got fairly dirty every day. Mm-hmm. That was something they valued because they didn't always have that privilege to be clean all the time. and to have a space that was clean. Like even the house my mom was born in and grew up till she was 9 had a dirt floor.
Wow.
Which is something I didn't think about growing up either,
Yeah.
right? So I think once they had those amenities, had that privilege to potentially go to a job that you could, be clean at, they valued that.
Yeah.
And you had a space that had the potential even to be kept clean or to be clean, they valued that.
Yeah.
Which I think could be a common identity within Hispanic culture because of the nature of migrant work in specifically America, so Mexican American identity, really.
Yeah.
I would also attribute it to, again, specifically Mexican American identity in that you didn't want to be the dirty Mexican.
Yeah.
Right? Because it was definitely a term, as unfortunate it is, that was not, it was used, right? It's something that we've all probably heard before. But yeah, I don't think that they wanted to be identified in that way.
Yeah, you want to maintain pride and dignity about who you are and to represent yourself in a nice way.
Yeah.
That makes sense. So you said that you identified the, are you counting the keeping a clean space and keeping a, clean self-presentation as two different things? Or are you seeing, because you said there were 3 things that you thought of.
I associate those two together.
Yeah.
But then I would say religion, and food, which maybe most people, I'm sure, could identify within their own cultural heritage. But I think the religion aspect's always been interesting because my father's Catholic and my mom was just Protestant, specifically Spanish Assembly of God.
Huh. I've never heard of them.
Yeah. So I definitely recognized that dichotomy when I was really young.
Mm-hmm.
And it was, for my mom's family, it was always just like a religious nature, which I would distinguish from Catholicism, which is traditional. You go to Mass every Sunday, you take the Eucharist. So it's very practice-oriented,
Mm-hmm.
whereas with my mom's family, again, it was more just living their faith in small ways, like whenever somebody'd be sick in the family, my mom would be like, I'm praying for you. But she wasn't religious, right?
Huh.
So it was spiritual. Or I remember as a child when her aunts and uncles, again, who lived in my hometown, passed away or were sick, we'd go to their house and we'd all pray. Or when they had their funerals, it'd be at the Spanish Assembly of God and the services would be in Spanish.
Did you grow up speaking Spanish, or does your mother speak Spanish?
That's an interesting conversation. She understands Spanish. She does not speak Spanish very well.
Okay. I could imagine that might be alienating, or make a person feel alienated from their culture to, not have the language.
I can't remember the quote, or excuse me, I can't remember who said this quote. I'll have to look it up. But he said, whoever said taking a language from a people is any less horrific than war. And that's kind of what happened with my family. Definitely wanted to assimilate to white Wyoming specifically, right? American culture, to the point where when my aunts and uncles went to school, they went to school only speaking Spanish. Their older brothers and sisters, okay?
Mm-hmm.
And they were told they were dumb. They were held back, right? They were essentially penalized for speaking their native language.
Really?
So by the time my mom went to school, and she was the 6th of the 7 kids, her parents had learned English, her brothers and sisters had learned English, and they didn't want her to experience that.
Yeah.
So she very much picked up on the language, but they refuse to talk to her. But it's so weird, right? Because like you said, like when you're in a family and they're all speaking a certain language and you're not speaking it, of course she acquired pieces of the language and still to this day can understand people speaking that very specific dialect of Spanish. But yeah, it really struggles with the production of the language because they didn't want to teach her. So, yeah, it's funny I don't identify with the language as much. In certain ways, yes, but I'm not fluent in any way.
Yeah, and that can be like, I grew up in mostly, well, it was like a white and Hispanic neighborhood, and so my friends were a lot of white people and a lot of Hispanic people from various national backgrounds. And that was like a common thing that I saw is some of my friends, maybe they were raised by a white parent, but physically is sort of the opposite of you, is like that they looked dark-skinned or identifiably Hispanic, but were raised by white parents and didn't speak any language, and so struggled in that way because they would be constantly labeled by the world according to all of these racist stereotypes, even to the point of just like things like getting called whatever, Brown Emily, or just like these really nasty things, but then at the same time having no, like, of course there is that, I'm sure they had some sort of identity, like brown identity, because the world is forcing you to see yourself in that way.
Sure.
But also having no connection to any culture, like cultural context in the way that you have access to.
I think a similar thing is I have lots of cousins who will say like, oh yeah, people come up to me speaking Spanish all the time, and I'm like, I don't speak Spanish, but I've never experienced that.
Yeah.
Even though they very much look Hispanic, and people assume that they have this language identity that they.
And there can be like a really hostile reaction to that that I've seen, like, oh, like you should know like this language, you're not a real Mexican or something like that, and it's like, what does that mean? And I think like from this conversation we really see how complicated these like racial identities can be, these ethnic identities can be. And it's not just, like, we started off by talking about 23andMe, and in the end, like, it seems like what we're saying is the genetic stuff, it doesn't really matter. The cultural heritage matters.
Yes. I would say, and kind of like we've been discussing as well, so the cultural heritage matters, as well as, to an extent, right, what phenotypically comes out of your genetics.
Totally.
Whether you identify or that or not, gets put onto you, gets socially constructed, right, as a part of your identity and interact with the world. Yeah.
So like you can identify as Black either because you have or any combination of these factors, but you could just as well identify as Black and look white because your parents are Black and because you are raised in this cultural context, but to pass as white, or to appear phenotypically Black but be raised only around white people and in white culture, but you would still identify as Black because the world treats you that way, even if you don't have access to like that community or that culture. And so in a way the genetics does matter. It does matter, but it's just a lot more complicated than a blood quantum or a breakdown of you are 23% North West European.
Yeah, because like we talked about with your mom's results, I think it was specifically, what of that do you think you identify with as far as culture goes, as far as traditions go, right?
Yeah.
It's like, what does that mean?
Yeah, what does it mean? The one thing I want you to talk about more is about the food traditions, because when you said
yeah.
like food traditions, I was like, what are my family's cultural food traditions? And I was like, mac and cheese from a box, Kool-Aid, like toast with some butter, and stroganoff. This is my cultural traditions. It's just like working mom.
Working mom. I like it. Yeah, and so you said that you identify then, I guess, with specifically white working class.
Mm-hmm.
So you said what that means in regards to food for you. What does that mean in regards to other things?
Yeah, so, and I think that this is something that I wonder about, and I've thought about how it relates to other people's identities, people of color's identities, because for me, I've always, like, a big part of my cultural heritage, my familial cultural heritage is, like, a woman-run household, because the men have been trash.
Like, almost, like, removed from the picture?
Yeah, I mean, just, like, heavy drinkers, just left the picture and weren't a part of it, or just, like, otherwise garbage women beaters, etc., so men have not been a part of my family on my mom or my dad's side. And so it was working class single women raising their children. And not having college degrees, not having any financial support. And so they're working really hard jobs and working multiple jobs, and so the women were like strong women, if you will, and there's like a lot of cultural stereotypes about like what a woman should be, and they are not those things in any way, because they couldn't be. Like, there's this idea that women should be nice and should be quiet and should be submissive, but when you've got to take care of your entire family and hustle your jobs, like, I mean, I'm sure they weren't always great in their relationships with men, sometimes because they were insufferable and ungovernable, and sometimes because they also just, like, chose garbage men, like, they... So in some ways, I'm sure that they were submissive. They had to have... I mean, how do you end up choosing such garbage men again and again? Like, there has to be... I don't know. Maybe I'm reading too much into that. But, yeah, I mean, they weren't homemakers. They didn't cook food. They didn't clean the house. They didn't have time for that, and they didn't have that need to, they didn't have a husband to satisfy or to impress, and for them, I think it's very different from the kind of, like, because it doesn't sound like your mom did it for her husband or to impress anyone necessarily. It's because of different values, but my family did not value those things. It was very just work, grind, get it done, send the kids to school, help them with college if you could, get a job as soon as you can. And part of that was also like a certain like sexual permissiveness, because there wasn't really ever the patriarchal figure. It was always just like mom, which, I don't know, yeah, it was very... My family would never identify on either side as liberal, but in some ways they were very progressive in a sense, at least in their sexual politics and in the fact that they were women who were working before women mostly worked. And I don't know, yeah, it's like so much of my like cultural heritage is just the default stuff. Other than that, like, I feel like the defining characteristics of like what I see my identity are the things that make me different from the people that I like the other people who share other aspects of their cultural identity, like other white people. Even though I obviously, I don't know, I think that's just like the tendency, we talked about this a little earlier, was that we think of white culture as not culture because it's the default. But, and in some ways, even though I'm aware that that's ridiculous, I also fall subject to that because I'm like, oh, the identifying parts of my culture are the things that are different from other people's culture within my same identity group. And that's not really fair. So I'm sure that much of my identity is all of the things that are blind, like that I am blind to because I don't ever have to look at because they are so normal.
Interesting. So would you say you identify or have come to see yourself as like one of those strong women that you said are prominent in your family or part of your cultural identity?
I don't know. Yeah, I would say I'm insufferable to a degree. But just seeing like the family relationships, like watching my mother and my aunt and my grandmother and my nana and their romantic relationships, and comparing them to my own marriage, I see that there's a lot of ways in which we're different. Or I'd like to think that we're different. So I don't know. That's a hard question, really.
Yeah. How much do you think that identity was formed by where you grew up? Like, do you think that was a part of...
Yeah, that's a great question because I think there's so much of the... so much of who my grandparents are and who my parents are was because of, when I look at them, I'm like, oh yeah, that's because my mother grew up in rural Wyoming.
Where'd she grow up?
She grew up in Laramie here.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah, and my grandmother grew up in Laramie.
Wow.
And...
So is that what drew you here?
Yeah, I came because
okay.
My grandma lived here, and so I had a place to stay until I could make enough money to get my own place.
Nice.
But yeah, so they're all from, like, my great-grandfather was a professor at the university.
Wow.
Yeah, and so yeah, I see, like, oh, my Nana, she grew up in rural Wyoming as a single mother in a conservative state, with no, like, her parents died when she was very young, so she didn't have their support, and so much of the way that she had to be tough, was probably because of where she grew up, and also the fact that even though she's very liberal in a lot of ways, she's stone cold, like, conservative Republican if you ask her about it. Like, her politics are very much from Wyoming, and the way that she had to harden herself was from Wyoming. And my father's mother was in rural Washington, or well, in Spokane, Washington,
yeah.
And like rural Idaho, and was same thing. I mean, it's like a conservative, low population place where it's not necessarily socially acceptable to be a single mother, especially in the 60s, and so you get tough.
Yeah.
But then my own, like, I think sometimes the reason that I'm different is because I grew up in Reno, and Reno is like a very, like, punk rock, like, godless place, where there's, like, tons of, I mean, punk rock is a big thing, tattoos are a big thing, flexible gender and sexuality is really common. It's very much full of counterculture, and that's what I grew up in. I grew up going to punk shows and hanging out with queer people and identifying as queer, and so a lot of the things that my parents grew up with and my grandparents grew up with in rural places, when they moved to Reno, and I was raised there, that really kind of shifted some things because I didn't grow up in a rural place. I grew up with punk rock. And so I think that necessarily affected, as I was going through adolescence and developing my ideas about what gender was and what to expect out of a romantic relationship and how to view the world politically, that was very much shaped through my like a punk culture more than, or at least as much as, I guess, my own family heritage.
So I feel like what's interesting in that is that I feel like much of American culture and American identity and even the races, right, the multitudes of identities within that can very much be defined by rural versus urban.
Yeah.
Because like you said, like your identity has likely shifted from what your family, right, or the strong women in your family identified as by that move, right, from the rural to urban.
Mm-hmm.
Do you feel like that's...
Yeah, I mean, because it went from, I mean, they were strong women, and which is something that maybe is attributed to more city living, but theirs was a brand of rural women, because they were still, like, they weren't just, like, strong women who believed in equality, they, like, hated men in a way that, like, my, like, more metropolitan upbringing in Reno, Nevada.
Hey, that's pretty metropolitan for Wyoming.
Yeah, emphasized more of a gender equality and not like a hatred and not like a strict gender roles. And my identity never felt like it had to be like in opposition to men or like screw the man. It was like because I didn't have those same cultural contexts. Yeah. So I think there's a huge difference in the way that I view myself and the world because of where I grew up, for sure. And you grew up all in Wyoming, right? Have you ever lived anywhere other than Wyoming?
Yeah, I've lived in Montana, which is fairly similar.
Okay.
Oregon, Portland, so definite. I would feel very comfortable saying the exact opposite of most places in Wyoming. And then Colorado. And I spent a significant amount of time in Colorado as well. Specifically the Denver metro area growing up. Because that's where a lot of my mom's family lives / settled.
Did you feel like somehow different or like... So as somebody who, I think who identifies as Hispanic or with her Mexican heritage, and in Wyoming that has like a certain, like, and growing up in the same town that your parents grew up in, like you have a very specific connection to that place. It seems like a part of your identity. Like how does that shift when you're in like Portland or Denver?
Yeah. So a couple of thoughts, weird things I had with that was both my parents. So my mom's family actually moved to Louisiana when she was young. Mm-hmm. So they both, and my dad grew up in Texas. So they both have this very like Southern identity and Southern culture, and I feel like there are also things that they brought from that have influenced me. Again, primarily in food, because that's what we do is food. But specifically growing up in rural Wyoming, what was odd was I had second and third cousins who were like in my class. But they were brown, right? Like they looked Hispanic, or are brown rather. They look much differently than me. So people would be like, you guys are cut, like how does that work, right? So that was always an odd experience. And then within that town, within my hometown as well, there's still the area and the house where my mom was born at, lived until she was 9. And within that block are houses that her cousins still live in and her aunts and uncles like lived and died in.
Wow.
And like people lived, that's another I think piece of Mexican Hispanic culture was you lived very close to one another.
Yeah.
And so it was very odd when they moved to Louisiana, but yeah, it's still like this part of town that people call the Mexican part of town.
Yeah.
And it's quite literally across the train tracks.
Of course.
Yeah, by the river. But yeah, what's interesting with that is that we only go there when my grandma was in town. That's the only time I remember going there. To see her brothers and sisters and nieces and nephews, or again, if somebody passed away, we'd go to that side of town to go to the...
So when you're in, like, so much of your identity is built around and a part of this place that has a family history. So do you, like, and would remind you of your family and your cultural heritage. When you're in a place that your family is not, do you somehow feel, like, more white? Or does that change at all for you?
This is gonna sound weird. This is gonna sound weird. I actually feel more white when I'm surrounded by my family. Isn't that odd? Because, again, out of most of my aunts and uncles and cousins, like my grandparents have 30 grandchildren.
Wow.
Me and my siblings are by far the most white passing.
Oh, okay.
Especially my height specifically has always been something I'm really...
How tall are you?
I'm 5'10".
5'10"? I never noticed.
Yeah. No, and it's something I've always kind of been self-conscious about, specifically because of my familial heritage.
Yeah.
I'm 2 inches taller than my tallest uncle. So it's like... And even my cousins, right? Like, I have all these guy cousins that I'm like, hi, you know? I'm this tall white woman. So yeah, it's funny. I feel more white around them, or whenever we'd go to like my mom's family side of the town, I'd be like, whoa, my Spanish is not up to par, or I don't know what's happening, or they just made some sort of pun in a certain kind of Spanish dialect I didn't learn and I don't get it. Right? It's very isolating, specifically I think with the language.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Is there anything else we want to talk about? I feel like we're going to have this endless video, but I want to make sure that we've talked about the things we meant.
My question right now is, do we specifically look at any of the texts, or is that just something, again, we voice over later? And is there anything else you wanted to bring up, too?
My mind is blanking about stuff. I think it might be useful to have, like, a second recording once we look at the tape and then we're like, okay, these are the things we didn't hit on, or maybe do like a separate recording, like maybe each of us would do a separate recording, or maybe we do it together, I don't know, where we like maybe voiced over any poetry we need to, any quotations we need to, any introductions, because if it might be easier to do it just time-wise if we did it separately, like if we were to meet up together, watch the video, discuss what we needed to do, and then divvy it up so that, like, each of us have solo voiceovers of certain things that, like, interject wherever they need to.
Yeah.
And then if we need to have another recording where we're talking, then we could do that.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
And as far as, like, the voiceover and just thinking, like, we need to talk, whenever we decide what that means, and yeah, I think doing it separately makes sense, we can, like, you can just take this and, like, say what you need to say, and then we'll just decide where it needs to go.
Would it be too weird if it was just, like, voiced on I guess the sound quality would be really bad on the phone.
Well, I just feel like it'd be different.
That's hooked into a phone.
Yeah, so you could literally just take
the mic.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
And speaking of that, and record it.
Yeah, I mean, I was just saying, this is probably vastly different than just using my phone, especially since my phone is, like, crap phone.
Yeah.
Okay.
Cool. I think that's a good plan. I had another thought. When should we... And you know what? Zach, how big of a file, how hard it... Well, no, let me ask this. Should we watch it together to decide what we want,
Either way,
probably.
I mean, probably, but if
I think
that
that
seems
makes more sense.
yeah.
Well, what I could do is I can get on the computer and quickly export it and upload it to YouTube. It would be in the best quality.
I know, I was thinking that too, but again, I think in order to make decisions on how we want.
Right, but you could at least watch it and make notes, and then you guys could then meet up and watch it together. Like, oh, I saw this before, or I didn't see this before, or I mean.
Either way, I guess you could just convert it, and then if you wanted to look at it before we met, you could.
Yeah. Do you have like a OneDrive, either of you, or like any kind of like cloud storage?
Dropbox.
Yeah.
Dropbox. Does Dropbox have video compatibility? Like, can you put a video on Dropbox?
Yes, but I think YouTube would probably be a better bet.
Yeah. Well, I was just thinking like when we. I guess because I have so like zero idea of how video editing works, I'm like, how do you even confront this beast? Like, I guess I assumed that we'd have to take the video and put it onto like iMovie or something, and like.
Oh yeah, I have Final Cut on the computer.
Okay.
So, like I was telling Shelby last night, I can do some color grading, bring things into a timeline, and then we can all sit down and be like, we want, like, you guys be like, I want this here, I want this here, I want just our voices with video panning or text or pictures. Like,
Okay.
I'm pretty proficient in that, so I mean,
Okay.
basically I can get instruction from you guys on where you want things, and I can make that happen.
Okay. So, is there any way? So we'll have to meet up somewhere where we can probably watch it together, whether or not we've watched it individually first, and then talk about what we want, and then go to him. So that, or do we? I would assume so. So we don't just like waste all of your time.
He's pretty free.
As long as it's not during work hours.
Yeah.
Nope, you have to quit your job. This is what you have to do for the next 2 weeks, or however long. Oh shit, we have like 9 days.
Yeah, it's go time for sure. And so luckily, one of my clients, because I was supposed to work the Thursday overnight shift, which was gonna totally fuck up my ability to do anything this week. But that shift got canceled. So, I could meet again on either on Wednesday afternoon after my thesis defense, on Thursday at any time other than our class,
Right.
and on Friday usually is like Alex and I's date night, so
Friday day, like,
Friday day would be good.
we could do that.
Okay.
If that works. Well,
Yeah.
actually, teaching, blah. I might have conferences, but we could just decide. We could just decide a time. Hi, James. And,
Did you hit stop?
I'm trying.
Well, it's transcoding. It has to save.
Oh, so it's
I am literally not getting into the phone.
So, but where would we watch it? Would we watch it here? Would we be able to watch it on a school computer?
I mean, it's on YouTube.
Yeah, especially if
If
you
it's on
convert
YouTube,
it to YouTube. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, then we could watch it wherever.
Okay. The only thing about YouTube, it'd be nice that if, well, I guess just on paper we could be like, at this time, and we can take notes like that, right? Or can,
Right.
yeah.
Yeah, I think that would work.
I mean, you'd have to do something very similar, unless I was there with you on the timeline
Yeah.
making cuts.
Okay.
You can look up that if you want.
Yeah. Okay. So then that meeting, you've got your conferences, but you don't know exactly when your conferences are.
Yeah, but I could just schedule them around when we wanted to meet.
Yeah.
What about... Okay, now I have a second thought. Did you say Thursday nights out? Like after
Thursday
class?
night's fine. Yeah, that would work okay.
What would you prefer? Like Friday day or Thursday night?
No real preference, honestly. I guess maybe.
If you guys want to do like video and stuff, Thursday night would probably work better for me.
I don't know. Maybe we just only have time though to look at.
Yeah, we should probably just figure it out
look
first
and take
before we.
notes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I guess Thursday night would be better. That way, I mean, I think Alex would like it if we said Thursday, so that we can have more Friday to hang out.
Cool.
So yeah, Thursday night would probably be better.
Okay. Yeah. Let's plan on that then. James, this is Allison.
Hi, James.
We've never met.
This is the keep puppy away from the shot.
Is it working?
Yeah.
It did work pretty well, actually.
That's good.
What is James's relationship to you guys?
This is his home.
Okay.
They adopted me.
Oh, took
Long
you.
lost
She's
cousin.
he's Stella's favorite person.
Oh, okay.
So pretty much that.
Are you guys done with this?
Yeah, I think so.